This year, the Houthis have begun to disrupt our lives. Attacks on shipping, havoc in supply chains. Now one of their leaders tells Rohit they will escalate attacks and would target the UK directly if they could.
If we had rockets and warplanes that could reach the US and UK, we would hit them without any hesitation.
It is a sobering reminder that the Iranian-backed militia is determined to up its attacks on us still further. Also on News at 10 tonight. The US warns of a new threat to national security from Russia. Reports suggest it involves space and nuclear weapons. The shooting tonight as the Kansas City players celebrate their Super Bowl win. Finally, food prices fall. A tiny piece of good news on inflation. How AI transformed a brutal former general in Indonesia into an election winner, and a return to Sarajevo for Torval and Dean.
This is so memorable. It was our launching pad.
Bolero will be forever our tune.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. The attacks by Houthis from Yemen on the world's shipping might seem a distant threat to us in the UK. A shortage of tea in the shops is hardly life-threatening, is it? But there was a warning today from a Houthi leader in a rare interview that they want to extend their attacks and target British interests, British embassies even, because of RAF involvement in airstrikes against Houthi bases. In his first major interview since those British and American strikes began, Mohammed al-Bukaiti told us that the Houthis would attack deep inside the UK and the US if they had the rockets and the warplanes to do so. Mr. Bukaiti spoke to us from Yemen in a studio link-up with Rohit earlier today.
Houthi fighters storming a cargo ship last November. This was one of the early attacks in a campaign which has continued for months. Terrified crew members surrendered to men wearing black who said they were here in retaliation for the war in Gaza. Dozens of vessels have been struck by missiles and by drones ever since. Tonight, one of the group's most senior figures, saying the attacks against ships will last until the war in Gaza is over, but adding they could continue beyond that. He said ways to escalate if there is no ceasefire have been discussed, so we pressed him on what they might be. If the war continued in Gaza, would you consider attacks against UK and US interests outside of the region?
نحن اليوم نستهدف أمريكا وبريطانيا أينما طالتها أيدينا، ولو كان معنا صواريخ وطائرات تصل إلى العمق الأمريكي والبريطاني فبكل تأكيد سنقوم بضرب أمريكا وبريطانيا بدون أي تردد طالما أنهم يعتدون على اليمن، وهذا حق مشروع لليمن.
Would you therefore consider the use of rockets and drones against, UK embassies, UK facilities within the region?
مثل هذه العمليات ليست مطروحة الآن على الطاولة، ولكن لدينا خيارات كثيرة للتصعيد إذا ما كان هناك تصعيد أمريكي بريطاني يستهدف المدنيين اليمنيين، وسيتم الإعلان عنه في حين.
He ruled out sabotage or assassination operations in the West. Not their style, he said.
If we have now, يعني لحظة بقولها، لو كنا نمتلك طائرات وصواريخ اليوم تصل إلى العمق الأمريكي والبريطاني لكنا قمنا بقصفها فورا.
Last week, we reported from the Yemeni city of Taiz, which is besieged by the Houthis, who are accused of cutting water supplies. There we found cynicism about the Houthis' apparent stance against Israel.
Stop besiege Taiz. Stop besiege Taiz.
Some people said to us on the ground, they felt that your leadership was manipulating the situation in Gaza to broaden their support across Yemen.
الكثير من الدول وكذلك حتى الأشخاص يخشون الوقوف إلى جانب الفلسطينيين خوفا من أمريكا وبريطانيا.
The prospects for peace in Yemen were discussed at the UN Security Council tonight, but in the chamber there was little optimism.
And Rohit is here to talk about all this. Look, we know the Houthis are very heavily backed by the Iranians. The Iranians, of course, do have a wide range of weaponry, which suggests that potentially the Houthis have not only the intention, as in your interview, but potentially the wherewithal as well.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, two things were clear in this conversation, this 90-minute conversation, by the way. You know, the ambition and the capability of the Houthis. Now, the capability was slightly less clear because, you know, we pressed them several times on what was the influence of Iran in this operation, and many times they batted that question away. But what is clear is the ambition. There was some honesty, you know, they said their rockets, they don't have the capability to strike Europe, for example. There was no sense of bravado there. But what is clear is that the situation in Gaza gives them an excuse to continue this operation in the Red Sea. What wasn't absolutely clear was, you know, whether it would end the moment that there was a humanitarian pause or a ceasefire announced. For example, they couldn't offer any clarity on what would happen, you know, say if there was an Israeli strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon. So, you know, some clarity from this today. And what is clear is, although the capability is not quite known, the ambition is there to continue. And the longer this continues for the Houthis, the greater their support within Yemen, because they can show themselves, they can demonstrate themselves to be a supporter of the Palestinian cause, which you know, and an enemy of Israel in the West.
OK, Rohit, thank you very much indeed. Now, the long, steady rise in food prices has finally come to an end. The latest inflation figures show they actually fell fractionally last month, down 0.4 compared to December. That's the first fall, though, for 2.5 years. Bread and cereals were cheaper. Overall, inflation in January was the same as December at 4%, but even that was slightly lower than expected.
We are on the road to price stability, and here in Reading there's proof. This company says it's no longer costing more to source the cardamom, peppermint, ginger and tea it needs for its tea bags. But lower inflation does not mean the company is about to cut the prices it charges consumers.
We have also been impacted by some of the recent issues in the Red Sea. There has been an increased cost of shipping lately. So we are hoping that these are just temporary issues which will get resolved over time. And once that happens, we will be reviewing our prices and we'll see if we can pass down any cost saving to our customers.
For those in work, pay is now rising faster than prices. But the government acknowledges that many households in the UK will still be feeling up against it.
Inflation never falls in a straight line. And although it's welcome that it hasn't gone up today, it is still double the target level of 2%. And we're not going to be able to relieve pressure on families until we hit that target and the Bank of England feels able to reduce interest rates.
Last January, consumer prices in Britain were rising at a rate of 10% a year. Since then, the annual headline rate of inflation has fallen and held steady at 4% last month. The Bank of England expects inflation to fall back to its 2% target by May. Interest rates currently stand at 5.25%. Markets are betting the bank will begin cutting in August. There are good reasons to be confident that inflation will ease further. Household energy bills are set to drop sharply in April when Ofgem resets its price cap, and they will drop again in July if the international market price of natural gas remains as low as it is. Meanwhile, the price of goods on sale in Britain has stabilised, despite the attacks we've seen on shipping in the Red Sea. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the Bank of England is worried about the strength of pay growth in the economy, and this former member of the bank's Monetary Policy Committee says it's right to be.
High pay growth backed up by high productivity growth is a wonderful thing. But high pay growth without high productivity growth, and that's where the UK is at the moment, is a recipe for strong growth in unit labour costs and ultimately higher inflation.
£16.10.
Valentine's Day at New Covent Garden Market, and there's evidence of more upward pressure on prices. Almost all of the flowers on sale here are imported from the EU. This trader says new post-Brexit border controls will cost him up to £300,000 a year, a cost he says he will eventually have to pass on.
We've tried not to, but inevitably this industry exists on the basis of high volume and low margin. So inevitably, if these costs continue to rise, then we will have to review that.
It may get more expensive, to say it with flowers, but most economists agree that inflation is set to wilt further, encouraging news for a government that will seek re-election this year.
And Joel is here. The big $6 million question, which I must have asked you at least 1,000 times, but let's make it 1,001. Where are interest rates heading?
And I've always dodged by answering.
Well, not tonight, my
but
friend.
not tonight. Tonight you're going to get a real answer.
Okay.
So the answer is what happens next. That much depends on what happens next to inflation. Inflation was expected to edge up today. In the event it didn't, Andrew Bailey appeared before the Lords Select Committee this afternoon and said, well, it doesn't really change anything in the grand scheme of things. What the bank is still looking for, Tom, is really compelling evidence that inflation is not just fading, but is going to come back down sustainably, semi-permanently to target of 2%. What it's worried about, as Michael Saunders alluded to there, is that there are people in the economy and businesses too who are trying to offset, claw back some of the spending power that they've lost, and goodness knows the last couple of years have left everyone feeling a bit poorer. But by doing that, what they're doing is either trying to force up their income or try to push up their profits. And that's a perfectly logical reaction to everything that's happened. But the issue is it risks pushing up prices once again. So the bank wants evidence that that is not something it any longer needs to be concerned about. Now, of course, what happens next to inflation, what happens next to interest rates, what happens to economic growth, we'll find out tomorrow, of course, if the economy went into recession at the tail end of last year. There's a chance it actually did. But all this matters enormously. We're in an election year. It will influence how people feel as they march off to vote in the general election, whenever that may be. And earlier I was at Downing Street interviewing the Chancellor on behalf of the main broadcasters. He sounded very sanguine on camera, but in the distance I heard an aide rush in, sort of saying, great, inflation at 4%, we'll have that. He didn't realise a journalist in the room, but it shows just how high the stakes really are.
OK, Joe, thank you very much indeed. And inflation features in the latest edition of our Talking Politics podcast, which is out today. In it, I also discuss with Robert and Carl Labour's latest difficulties with new claims of anti-Semitism plus house building promises, amongst other things. It is on ITVX or wherever you get your podcast. Let's go to the United States now, where a Republican politician says he's been made aware that there is a danger to national security, but he couldn't say what it was because it involves classified information. He's demanded that the Biden administration declassify it and reveal what it is. Slightly strange turn of events. You might say there are suggestions, though. It involves Russia, space, and nuclear weapons.
5 days ago, Russia launched this Soyuz rocket from a cosmodrome in its far north. The payload was classified, but there is now growing speculation about what Russia is doing in space.
These attacks are still going to happen.
Today, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner, took the extraordinary step of issuing a letter referring to a destabilizing foreign military capability that should be known by all congressional policymakers. It was later reported this referred to Russia's space program. Today, another senior Republican tried to allay fears about this emerging new threat.
And I want to assure the American people there is no need for public alarm. We are going to work together to address this matter, as we do all sensitive matters that are classified.
Thank you, Karine.
President Biden's national security advisor was questioned about the issue and expressed frustration it had been made public ahead of a meeting tomorrow with 8 senior congressmen.
So I am a bit surprised that Congressman Turner came out publicly today in advance of a meeting on the books for me to go sit with him alongside our intelligence and defense professionals tomorrow. That's his choice to do that. All I can tell you is that I'm focused on going to see him, sit with him, as well as the other House members of the Gang of 8 tomorrow. And I'm not in a position to say anything further from this podium at this time.
The United States has long been concerned with both Russia and China's development of weapons which could be deployed into orbit.
Enough, let's sign.
Exactly 5 years ago, President Trump signed into law a new branch of the US military, Space Force. His vice president talking in robust terms about the threat they faced.
We must recognize, as our president has, that space itself represents a warfighting domain. And we will be prepared to defend our nation and defend our freedom in space.
Experts say Russia has both military and political reasons for strengthening its space capabilities.
So the political rationale would be that it allows Putin and the Russian government, their political leadership, to show strength at a time when they are, really flailing in Ukraine. And I say that knowing that the development of such a system like this would have taken years. It would almost certainly predate their decision to invade Ukraine.
It is highly unusual for intelligence of this nature to be put out in the public domain. Whatever the motivation, it has now put the White House under considerable pressure to clarify the extent of the threat. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Washington.
There was an even more immediate, but of course unrelated danger in the United States tonight at the victorious homecoming parade of the Super Bowl winners, the Kansas City Chiefs. Shots were fired near the parade after the team had passed by. One person was killed and 14 others were injured, 3 of them critically. There's no known motive for the shooting yet, but 2 people were arrested at the scene close to the main train station in Kansas.
A sea of red Kansas City fans gather for their team's Super Bowl victory parade. The NFL players receive a hero's welcome in their hometown and revel in the glory of their Sunday night win.
We were the last one to show.
But just after the stars left the stage, this afternoon's celebrations were cut short. The sound of gunshots stunned the crowd to silence. The shooting was captured by a local TV crew and a reporter waiting to go live.
Guys, something's going on.
And through the crowd, the injured are seen lying on the floor. Screams of excitement turn to screams of panic as hundreds of thousands of fans start running.
I was just telling everybody to get down, and then get out the way, and the officers were coming around, and that's what they did.
Families are now trying to escape the chaos and confusion. Officers surround the stage area. But from the air, it appears it's fans who tackle a suspected shooter to the ground. The police have confirmed that 2 armed people have been detained.
Officers responded to the area, took 2 people into custody, and also immediately rendered life-sustaining aid to those victims. We're still gathering information on the number and the status of victims. But like I said, we know that one of the victims is deceased.
The number of injured spectators is in double figures tonight, as detectives begin their investigation into how this celebration of sports success turned into a shooting. Ellie Pitt, News at 10.
The pursuit of a pause in the fighting in Gaza brought new pressure on Hamas today. It came both from Turkey's President Erdogan and the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, even said a change in Hamas's position could lead to progress. But at the same time, his troops are stepping up their attacks on Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip. Nearly 1.5 million Palestinians are crowded into the area. The only escape is back towards their old homes in northern Gaza, if indeed there is anything left of them.
On the move again. Their journey isn't so much about where they are going as where they are leaving. They've decided they need to be anywhere but Rafah, the southernmost Gazan city now looming ever larger in Israel's crosshairs. The sanctuary they seek can only lie to the north, the areas that have already been hammered by the IDF. Bombed out buildings like the remnants of this UN school are being reoccupied. Increasingly, people are having to try to make a home in the ruins of Gaza. Back in Rafah, this week's aerial bombardment may be a foretaste of the violence still to come. Ibrahim Hassouna is a sole survivor. The airstrikes that were part of the rescue mission, which ultimately saw 2 Israeli hostages reunited with their families, cost Mr. Hassouna his entire family. His parents, his 2 brothers, his sister-in-law, and 3 nephews and nieces were killed when their home was reduced to rubble. He said the destruction was so extensive that he was only able to identify his relatives by small fragments of their clothing. The repercussions of the Gaza war reached Israel's northern border again today, where 1 female soldier was killed in a Hezbollah rocket attack. The Israelis retaliated by bombing several targets in South Lebanon. Reports suggest 4 people were killed, including a mother and 2 young children. The best hope for calming things down is a ceasefire, and the quest for one saw negotiators in Cairo unexpectedly joined today by President Erdogan. Turkey and Egypt have not enjoyed diplomatic relations for more than a decade, but having played host to some of the Hamas leadership over the years, the Turks can add to the pressure on the terror group to lower its demands. In another unusual development today, President Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, also weighed in. He called on Hamas to reach a deal with Israel as soon as possible. Having apparently gone to Cairo just to listen, the Israeli negotiating team returned here last night. The ball is now in Hamas's court and the pressure on the terror group is building. Tonight, the Israeli Prime Minister's office put out an encouraging statement saying, and I quote, "A change in Hamas's position will allow the negotiations to advance." John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
What you see of a political leader during an election campaign is not always what you get when he or she is voted into office, as they are about to discover in Indonesia. Because of artificial intelligence and fake videos, this is a real danger in this year of elections all around the world. The Indonesian politician who has claimed victory after today's election, the 3rd biggest in the world, was presented in doctored videos as a kindly, smiling elderly man. His record as a brutal former general suggests he is nothing of the kind.
For a man in his 70s, he has lots to teach the world. Perhaps not about dance, but certainly about the future of democracy and how the real world and the virtual realm are merging. This is the cuddly cartoon version of the candidate who's wiggled his way to win an election conducted in large part online. It's quite a makeover for the actual man. Prabowo Subianto, an ex-general dogged by claims of human rights abuses linked to his former boss. President Suharto, infamous dictator, dead for more than a decade, yet popular enough to digitally exhume to endorse him. This deep fake video was viewed almost 5 million times on social media. From the grave, he reached across a vast country of 17,000 islands, over 3,000 miles, and a youthful electorate. Beyond Indonesia, 70 nations go to the polls this year, a big test for democracy and AI influence.
If we can't believe what we see or hear with our own eyes, we're talking about sort of chaos in the information world, in which you can't really tell what's true or not. People have their own completely confected truths, which they might passionately believe because they've seen it or heard it themselves.
Already in America, a computer-generated voice of Joe Biden urged Democrats to stay home in a primary race.
Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again.
And closer to home, London Mayor Sadiq Khan fell victim to an AI hoax, which tried to show him favour a Palestinian march over Remembrance Day.
Why don't they have Remembrance Weekend next weekend? What's happening in Gaza is much bigger.
While in Pakistan, an AI Imran Khan spoke to supporters while the real man was locked up in jail. It's not always this easy to tell the fake from the fact. Voters everywhere have been warned. John Ray, News at 10.
Pretty darn disturbing, if you ask me. Now, finally, it was 40 years ago tonight that one of the greatest moments in British sport took place. A purple patch of ice dancing by Jane Torvill and Christopher Dean at the Winter Olympics won them gold. Their romantic routine on Valentine's Day to the sound of Ravel's Bolero lit up Sarajevo. 4 decades later, they went back to dance again, but also to announce that sadly their love affair with performing is coming to an end.
The last Bolero in Sarajevo. On the day they announced their retirement, Torvill and Dean returned to the ice in the city that made them household names. Exactly 40 years ago, 24 million people in the UK alone watched their mesmerising performance at the Winter Olympics. One of the most memorable moments in British sport.
We were sort of in our zone, in a trance. And it was only at the end, as we finished, that it was like back into reality, because all the applause with all the audience.
We'd done it, we'd made no mistakes, so it was all good.
Earlier, they returned to reminisce in the exact spot where they won gold.
This is so memorable. It was our launching pad. Bolero will be forever our tune.
But within a few years, the city echoed to a very different sound during the war and genocide in Bosnia that claimed 100,000 lives.
Hi, everyone.
This week, they brought children whose communities were divided in that conflict together for skating lessons, some of the younger ones venturing onto the ice for the very first time. As a 6-year-old, Elma Krasny presented Torvill and Dean with flowers. As a teenager during the war, she had to dodge snipers' bullets to get groceries.
A lot of people found strength and motivation to go through this war because of the lovely memories that we had during the Olympics. Sarajevo just loves them. Yeah, they're just such a beautiful part of our lives.
How important was it for you to go and meet some young skaters?
Oh, it's great today.
It's great, yeah. It's just nice to see like the real beginners on their little two-bladed skates.
They were us.
Yeah.
You know, they could be future us. You know, but
Yeah.
that's how it started for us.
40 years on, they're still drawing a crowd here.
I don't think there was as many cameras when we won the Olympics.
But they also came here with an announcement. While they'll continue as judges on Dancing on Ice, they'll dance together for the last time on a farewell tour next year. Partners for longer than many married couples, they say the secret is knowing when to stop.
How many duos do you know that have been together that long and still together? And we couldn't come up with any, to be honest. But I think the secret is not getting married.
Yeah, don't get married.
Their performance tonight was less ambitious than 40 years ago, age appropriate, as they put it. But while their days as dance partners are numbered, this will always be their tune. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Sarajevo.
What a brilliant pair. That's it. I will be here same time tomorrow. For now, good night. Thanks for watching.